In over 120 countries, there are RSM experts who take time to find out what makes you and your business tick. Wherever you are and wherever you want to go, our audit, tax and consulting services are designed to help you move forward with confidence. It's your ambitions we care about, and like you, our focus is on your future. The advice you receive may come from individual RSM experts, but it will be supported by our collective local and global knowledge, helping you grow and safeguard your future. That's the value of RSM. That's the power of being understood.
Hello everyone. Welcome to today's session. Today's webinar is one of our regular RSM webinar dedicated to complementary to our client and also for public. So if you want to stay updated about our tax regulation and getting to know about our tax issue, other tax issue, please do not forget to check our website regularly and register the webinar events. Let me introduce RSM Indonesia. RSM Indonesia is one of Indonesia's leading audit tax consulting firm that offers world-class services in many areas that are important for the growth and sustainability of a company. Having established as a strong local presence for more than 37 years, RSM Indonesia has established offices in Jakarta and Surabaya. And as a member of RSM International Network with more than 860 offices worldwide, provide a unique one-firm structure that enables our clients to more readily connect to our extensive national and international networks and industry experience. For tax services, we have business tax that include the custom and trade services, tax advisory, tax audit and dispute, and tax compliance. We have also international tax services, tax merger and acquisition, including tax due diligence and tax restructuring. And of course, we have also transfer pricing services. Today, a webinar, our speaker is Mr. Nick Graham and Bu Eni Susetyoningsih. Mr. Nick Graham is our senior partner in tax services. Also, Bu Eni Susetyoningsih is tax partner in our tax services. Before beginning the presentation, I would like to inform you the webinar protocol. The participant will be muted during the webinar. Participant can submit questions in writing via chat box on the participant screen. Please state your name and company. Questions are expected to be short, concise, and clear, and using polite language. The speaker will select questions to answer in Q&A session. Of course, it is okay for you to write down the question in Bahasa Indonesia in the chat box. We would like to also inform you that there is a feedback form for the participant to fill in. After you filling in the feedback, you could obtain the webinar presentation slide. So please welcome Mr. Nick Graham for our first speaker. Pak Nick.
Great, thank you very much, Honey. Let me just share my screen to everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for this webinar regarding managing tax compliance risk. As Honey mentioned, I'm a partner in our tax and outsourcing practice, and I'll be joined by Annie, who will also cover some of the topics that we're covering today. We expect this to run for maybe 60 to 90 minutes, leaving at least 30 minutes for Q&A. And we do look forward to your questions. As Honey mentioned, you are welcome to write the questions dalam bahasa Indonesia, and either Annie or me will then review and respond to those. So what are we going to cover today? 4 key points: the general tax compliance cycle, discussion regarding sanctions and how to avoid typical pitfalls that we have seen in our experience, a general comment regarding the digital channels for tax compliance, and also, and importantly, is considering what happens when the tax office contact you for questions or tax audit. So first of all, the tax compliance cycle. Now, of course, I recognize, or we recognize, that most of you should be quite aware of this, but we do feel it's important to go over these things again as a reminder, and also maybe from a different perspective as well. So when we think about compliance, it's useful to think about the bigger picture, the environment, the tax compliance environment. And if we look at it, of course, us, yourselves as taxpayers, are influenced and impacted and pushed and pulled by various factors. Some of those are obvious, maybe some of those are not so obvious. For example, the state budgetary pressure. We all know Indonesia runs a deficit, and it's trying to control that deficit while also funding necessary services and also, funding development of the country. For example, the plan to move the capital to Kalimantan. All of these things cost money, and the money has to come from somewhere. And the biggest source is tax. And so therefore, if the government wants to do more, then unless they can borrow more, they need to get more tax revenue. And as we know, that is one of the areas that they constantly focus on. Frankly, one of the concerns is that it tends to be more a focus on intensification, intensifikasi, not extensification. Extensifikasi, not broadening the tax base so much. It is, as many of you would know, the focus is on your compliance, not finding the people who are not compliant. Of course, the tax amnesty and maybe even the VDP sekarang are helping to broaden the tax base, but the focus still is on the taxpayers that they know about. Secondly, is that the tax office have become more sophisticated regarding their knowledge, their experience. They regularly interact with other tax officers. They have sharing and so on. They have secondments. So, you can't just say, oh, well, I'm dealing with the Indonesian tax office. They don't know much. They do. They know a lot more than you think they know. They are also using technology more and more. And you would already know that from, the fact that you can file online. We now have e-factor, we have e-bupot, we have pre-population. All of these things are the tax office rapidly moving into, well, maybe it's the 22nd century now, not the 21st century. And they are also changing their strategy and their approach to tax administration, moving from historic, which was very, very passive. Yeah, anyone who's been doing tax or been involved in tax or in business for more than 10 years would know that, you know, dulu in the 90s, in the 2000s, maybe even 2010, the tax office basically did not touch you unless you claimed a refund. Yeah, kalau tidak ada minta refund, then no problem. You know, pay a little bit extra tax each year, not looked at. As many of you would know, that is changing now. The tax office is moving from being passive to being proactive. And they are starting to, you know, your account rep, that whole process of having an account rep means that now you get questions from your account rep. You know, why does this not reconcile? It seemed like maybe there's some difference between revenue and PPN, or your salaries don't seem to be linking with your PPH 21. Things like that. You know, 20 years ago, no way you would have had that question. Now you do. And because they are also, the system is now online, then your account rep has the data. Yeah, dulu, manual systems. So they did not have the ability to look except for the biggest company. So it's changing. The environment's changing. The other one is the integration of not just the tax office's systems, di antara KPP, di antara DJP and KPP, but also integration of other information from within Indonesia. The fact is, you know, you've got data coming in from the banks, you've got data coming in from BPN, you've got data coming in from car sales. Someone wants to get a credit card. You know, more and more data is being shared or becoming available to the tax office. Their database is becoming stronger and stronger. Fourth, the global tax environment is also changing. I mentioned before that there's a lot of cooperation between foreign tax offices. Of course, they're competing a little bit. They all want the tax, but they are also sharing information. AEOI, of course, is one obvious area where data is being shared. And of course, from an Indonesia perspective, it's particularly data being shared from overseas, Singapore, Hong Kong, US, UK, Australia, into Indonesia. And we are hearing of clients that AIR is asking the question, hey, you seem to have a deposit, you know, in the UK for $1 million. Why is that not reported on your tax return? And finally, of course, the tax regulations are changing and changing quite frequently. Not just the laws, Cipta Kerja, lalu HPP, but now we have then the implementing regulation, and then so that we have the PMK or the PP, maybe the PMK, and then we have PERS and so on. So there's a lot of things happening. And so it is important to be aware of the regulations. Unfortunately, saying I did not know is not, you know, an acceptable alasan. It is only that, it's just an alasan. The penalties will still apply. So it is important for us to just understand what's happening. You know, there is more and more pressure, I think, on us as taxpayers. Now, so that's the environment. Then there's the question, of course, obvious maybe for many of you, who should comply with the tax regulations? Well, as a general comment, who should comply are resident taxpayers, yeah, whether that is a corporate. And of course, you have to remember that corporate for a long time now means badan, not just perusahaan. So badan includes yayasan, for example. So it's a broader concept that some people might think. Even if that yayasan is not for profit, that does not mean there is no obligation to comply. That yayasan still needs to lodge an SPT badan. It still needs to withhold tax on payments of gaji. It still needs to deduct withholding tax when it pays service provider or pays the landlord. If it does have some revenue generating business, then potentially it has VAT as well. Of course, we have resident individuals, in particular, of course, Indonesians. And as you may know, now that we have, after Cipta Kerja and UU HPP, we now also have some clearer rules when an Indonesian can become non-active if they move overseas, when they can effectively become a non-resident. Dulu, those rules were not so clear. And of course, some, I guess, more unique arrangements, permanent establishments, PEs. And it's important to be aware that rep offices, the tax office is now treating a rep office, kantor perwakilan. So your, for example, your kantor perwakilan perusahaan asing or your KP 3A, they regard those as full taxpayers, meaning they expect an SPT badan from those, even if there is no revenue. And then finally, we have our, what I'm calling special cases for tax compliance. For example, as you may know, a foreign e-commerce business that has certain activity threshold or certain number of customers is now required, or sorry, can be appointed by the Minister of Finance to then be responsible for collecting VAT. So even though they are a non-resident taxpayer without a PE in Indonesia, by consequence of the PMK, well, in fact, it comes out of, sorry, it comes out of UU Cipta Kerja. As a consequence of that, they are required to comply with VAT, specific VAT regulations. So that's what I call the special cases. And we may well see then, for example, when we're talking about digital taxation, as you may know, there's the talk of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and will global e-commerce, or not, will global digital businesses that don't have a presence somehow be taxed? Well, these may well be dealt with through what we'll call special cases, or not because they've got a PE, but because there's determined to be some obligation because of either a global consensus, or it may be Indonesia goes alone and activates certain regulation. As you may know, there is something in Indonesia called a digital tax, or which could be applied if there is no global consensus on how to tax those multinational digital companies. So that's who should comply. So of course, if you are a non-resident, a true non-resident with no PE, then you, as an individual or a company, do not have Indonesian tax compliance obligation. You may face Indonesian tax consequence, for example, on your income through withholding tax, but that's not a compliance obligation for you. It's an obligation for your Indonesian, partner or party that you're dealing with. So we've talked about who, and we've talked about the environment. Now why? Why is tax compliance important? And I would expect that all of you know this, but again, we just want to remind you of some of the reasons why it needs to be thought about. The obvious one, of course, is if you make a mistake and it's either detected or you self-report, there will be penalties. So of course, if your compliance is stronger, then there should be less penalties or less risk of penalties. Secondly, if there is a problem because of bad compliance, and that could be that there's a tax audit and then the tax audit becomes worse, the result, and you end up with maybe having objection, you go off and appeal, or it could be that there's suddenly lots of SP2DKs from your AR because lots of variance. Suddenly, management are spending time, or maybe they're engaging consultants and they're having to explain to consultant about the process. Maybe operations have to go and find data or be involved in things. So you can have a real disruption to running and managing business. So there's that, if you like, maybe it's an opportunity cost. Management time, operation time is wasted on this compared to making the business successful. And then, of course, if you do have a problem, there will be additional costs. And these are costs above lebih dari the sanksi. So we're talking about actual additional tax. If you make errors, for example, if you incorrectly withhold the tax to a non-resident, or you do not withhold because you did not know you should, then of course you will become assessed for that tax plus the penalty. But that means the cost of the transaction has increased unless somehow you can get that money from the vendor. Maybe you can get the money from the vendor if it's still in the same tax year, because maybe they can use the credit. Or they might say, if it was one-time service, sorry, not my problem. So it increases your cost as well. The fourth one, which we're seeing is becoming more interesting, is the KSWP. You know, if you have not lapor your last 2-year annual tax return, then your KSWP becomes not valid. And if that's the case, then if you want to amend anything through kehakiman, through AHU system, it will be blocked. If you want to do things in OSS system, it will be blocked. If you want to do imports, there will be a problem with import. So this KSWP, you know, valid taxpayer status, is becoming like a, I guess it's an administrative sanction, if you like, for failing to be compliant, being up to date with your tax lodgement. And who knows whether in the future, but maybe between the government and other, well, maybe certainly government institutions, they might start making the KSWP becoming like a, you have to have valid KSWP to do anything, and you know, with the government, maybe. And then who knows what might happen if you're starting to look at borrowing or you know, getting mortgage or getting credit card, whether these things will be, you know, become relevant as well. So if you are compliant and your KSWP is valid, you avoid those issues. And the fifth is, of course, if the company or the badan as a taxpayer has not paid the taxes, cannot pay the taxes, maybe because they are so big, because the mistake was so huge, and then the company says, hands up, I cannot pay, you need to remember that the pengurus, so directors, commissioners, and even shareholders potentially face risk. So it's not, even though, you know, the logic is PT is, you know, perseroan terbatas, limited liability, the tax office and KUP law allow action to be taken against other individuals, not just the company. So good tax compliance is also protecting the pengurus, the pemegang saham, from potential, you know, surprise action by the tax office to recover tax. Okay, so now we move on with that sort of background, you know, who and why. Just move, of course, onto the obvious, corporate income tax. When do you need to lodge your return? Now, I'm sure everyone knows that it's 4 months after your year end. So, of course, end of April, if you are December year end, or 4 months after your non-standard year end. There is that opportunity, of course, to extend, apply for an extension, which can be given for up to 2 months. And of course, any tax should be paid before you lodge your return. Now, it's important to note, if you have not lodged your return on time, and that means if you have not lodged it by the end of the 4th month, if you did not request extension, or you have not lodged by the end of the extension period, then that potentially exposes you to greater risk. First, if there's a tax audit, then potentially the penalties can be lebih besar daripada if you had lodged a return and then there was a tax audit. So it is important to focus on-time lodgement of the SPT Badan. You know, you can always potentially amend it later, but of course, you don't just lodge it guessing the numbers, because that would be foolish. Now, again, just at this point, I'd like to remind everyone, if you do have any questions, please do put them into the chat box. And as we've mentioned earlier, it's okay to put those in Bahasa Indonesia. So now moving on to the monthly income tax obligations. Now, there's nothing new here, of course. Most taxes are due for income tax are due on the 10th, most, not all, and all of them need to be reported by the 20th. And as you would all know, now most of this would be done electronically. So the ability to pay tax is a lot easier than it used to be. And I've been doing this long enough. I can still remember the day when we used to be going to our clients on the 8th and the 9th to pick up checks, to deposit checks, some at SSP at the bank. And you get someone who'd made an error, or maybe someone's forgot to sign, or, you know, something wrong with the data. You know, all these things have been removed by moving to an electronic environment. And the reporting, of course, now is as well. So we have had a lot of improvements with how things are. Of course, the other ones, and of course, maybe something, if you're not aware, of course, your PPH 25. In the past, you had to pay and then report. Now, provided that payment is a e-payment and you get your NTPN, that is automatically reporting. So the tax office are actually trying to reduce the compliance administration burden in terms of what you have to do. For the others, Article 22, of course, when the payments occur depend on the situation. Of course, if it's for customs, you have to pay it at the time of preparing your PEB, your customs import documentation. For crypto, which is the last point, it's the 15th of the month by the marketplace that is acting as a collector in that case, or if it's been self-assessed. And also just something to keep in mind is that, I'm just going to bring on a pointer here. So when you're talking about, of course, Article 22, it covers a certain number of luxurious assets or luxurious purchases. So for example, if you're purchasing a expensive house or condo, or expensive, like I think there's boats are in there and aircraft in there, these things will also have Article 22 at the time of purchase. And just some more Article 25. You know, frankly, we haven't seen these situations where you've got these grouped returns, but those exist as well. So moving on to the VAT, again, there's of course, there's no fundamental change to the VAT. That generally, of course, it's you have to pay by the end of the following month. You have to lapor after you make that payment and no later than the end of that following month. But some probably things to remember is, in particular, is your PPN or offshore VAT, PPN, JKP-LN. So, and this, I'll actually mention this later when we talk about pitfalls, is there's still a lot of taxpayers in Indonesia who are not aware if they use a service from overseas or they use an intangible good from overseas, for example, pay for a royalty, pay for use of IP, those things are subject to self-assessed VAT. That self-assessed VAT has to be paid by the 15th of the following month and then reported. Provided you pay it, you then get a credit for it, assuming your business is VAT registered and it relates to a VATable delivery. So in theory, it's just a timing issue. It's like importing goods and then selling goods. You've got a timing there between when you get the credit, or sorry, when you pay for the input and when you can actually use that to reduce your output VAT. But we do see a lot of our clients that are not aware of this. And this has been in the VAT law now for, I don't know, decades, a long time. But we still see it getting picked up. And it's very easy for the tax office to find it, because all they have to do is normally look on the Article 26 return, which particularly covers, I know there's bunga and there's dividend, but there's also jasa and there's also intangible goods. So all they have to do is reconcile that to any PPN Luar Negeri, PPN JKP-LN, and ask the question, why is there a difference? It seems you have missed something. So, you know, I would say this is one of the key takeaways. If you were not aware that use of services from overseas, consumption of intangible goods from overseas was subject to VAT, please be aware that is the case and there is a liability there. And so, you know, if you don't pay it, then you get that surprise need to pay it later and you get the penalties on that. Following the new HPP law, we also have some updates on some VAT regulations. Now, most of these are actually just changing, of course, the rate. The rate now, of course, for VAT is now 11 generally compared to 10, or the tariff, if there was a special tariff, it's been adjusted to the 11%. But just to be aware, of course, that all of these are now effective from the 1st of April. Of course, as we have mentioned, you will all get these slides, so that's why I'm not going to, you know, read these one by one. So just moving on to some others. Now here, what I would like to remind or focus on are 2 points. I mentioned before about the offshore VAT or PPN JKP-LN. So that's one side of things. But of course, that's particularly where there's a foreign, just a general service provider. Potentially for the intangible goods, it might be caught under PMK 60, although it does depend. And of course, so Netflix, for example, well, that's actually probably technically that's a digital service or intangible good. If those have been picked up under PMK 60, then there is no longer the obligation to self-assess VAT. However, if that service, so if Netflix, for example, if Netflix had not been appointed as a PMSE collector, then, and you as a business, or technically as an individual, and you were consuming that service, you in fact have to still self-assess. So just because a Netflix, for example, or a Facebook, or I don't know, you've got something that's not yet ditunjuk by Ministry of Finance to be a PMSE collector, just because that has not happened does not mean there is no VAT obligation, because that self-assessed obligation is the fundamental obligation that is only removed if that party has been ditunjuk via PMK 60. So do be aware of that. And of course, if it is ditunjuk, then they have to deal with that. And the good news is, provided you can deal with them and tell them, if they can give you the payment receipt with your details on it, then you as a company can claim a input credit for that VAT, provided you are VAT registered, of course. And finally, I just want to mention, of course, that one of our new regulation, PMK 68, crypto asset trading. And if that is conducted through a PPMSE, so our e-marketplace organizer, then there is also, they should collect VAT on that transaction. And as you may know, the rate of VAT, it uses a different tax base. So that the amount of tax, VAT, it's not, if you like, 10% of the total value. It's a lower number because they're trying to encourage Indonesian crypto asset trader to trade through a proper marketplace. And the reason they want that is so they can capture the transaction. So then moving on from, we've talked about the general corporate tax, timing, what you need to pay, and when you need to pay. We've talked about monthly tax, monthly VAT reporting. The other one, of course, is what do you need to put into, or what do you need to attach to your SPT Badan, your corporate income tax return. Now, this list is not everything, because in fact, more and more regulation say if you want a deduction for this, then you need a lampiran. So, even if when you look into the tax return form, there's only a certain number of, if you like, pre-filled lampiran, but there's open blank area where you can isi any other lampiran that you need to put in. But the obvious ones, of course, and the reason you need to be aware of what you should attach is that failure to attach all relevant lampiran should deem that your return is not complete. And so then that creates a weakness if there is then a tax audit. So it is important to make sure all necessary lampiran are attached. First one, of course, audited financials. Now, strictly, should clarify, you do not need to attach audited financials if you are not audited. But if you are audited, harus dilampirkan. And for those maybe that have got a newly established entity, the legal obligation to have an audit, if you are not, say, a public company or a bank or an insurance company, if you are just a PT biasa, the legal obligation under Indonesian law is if your asset and or your revenue are 50 billion rupiah or more. And that's a requirement under the company law. It's not under the tax law. It's not under investment law. It's under the company law that says audited financials shall be given to your shareholders kalau lebih dari 50 miliar asset or revenue. So, you do potentially have the opportunity to provide management financials in your tax return if you are a smaller company or if your audit is not complete. And you can always then add it later, which may need you to amend aspect of your return if the audit occur later. Of course, if you paid some tax, then you have to attach, although now it's electronically, attach the SSP or the information regarding the NTPN. If you've made payments for entertainment or promotion, these need nominative lists. if it's a PE and it has reinvested to reduce the object for Article 26 branch profit tax, then you need to provide that notification. For TP docs, now this is an important one that some people aren't clear on, and some people then forget about, is if you meet the threshold for preparing TP documentation, then you don't have to attach your TP report to your SPT Badan. You do have to fill in certain attachment, your lampiran 3A1, 3A2. So those have to be some information from your TP docs goes into those lampiran. And that needs to then be lodged with the return. But what is important to be aware of is that your TP docs are required to exist, harus ada, when you lapor your SPT Badan. And then what that means is if later there's a tax audit or there's an inquiry, you basically only have 14 days to provide the TP docs. And the risk is if you've forgotten because, you know, it's masih sedang jalan or sedang proses or semua bingung or belum appoint consultant, you know, if things like that are occurring, that's your problem. It's not the tax officer's problem. And although we do find the AR are often quite relaxed about this, the law and the regulations don't require them to be relaxed. And so the risk is there. So it is important if you need to understand your TP obligations. And if you've got them, you need to get organized quickly so that you don't face this risk. There are different thresholds, sorry, for whether you need TP doc. And of course, the most obvious one is if you have any transaction with a lower tax jurisdiction that is a related party. So if you deal with Hong Kong or you deal with Singapore, whether it's revenue or expense, you deal with a tax haven country. In fact, today, even if you deal with the US, because their corporate tax rate is masih di bawah, it's going to go back up, we expect. But any of those, you must have TP docs. Doesn't matter how big the transaction is. In fact, you've got to have them. So it's something to be aware of. If the tax return is signed by someone other than Direxi, then of course you need to attach the power of attorney, the special power of attorney. If there is any final tax, because the company is di bawah threshold for access PP 23, then you will need to attach the lampiran for that as well. Now, I'll talk a bit more about 9 and 10, because again, this is an area of risk, particularly 10. As you might know, or you should know, there is a regulation that says that if your debt to equity ratio, and that's all interest-bearing debt, whether it's related party or from the bank, doesn't matter. If your debt to equity ratio is more than 4:1, then there is a reduction in the amount of borrowing cost that can be claimed as a deduction. In fact, if you've got negative equity, because maybe your capital, there's been big losses, lebih dari capital, then in fact, none of your borrowing costs are deductible. So of course, that's just the regulation. But then what they say is you then have to attach data in your SPT Badan regarding this. And if you do not attach the DUR report, number 9, then the return can be deemed incomplete. That's not para, I guess. However, if some of that debt was from a foreign private party, so utang swasta luar negeri, and you do not attach the detail of that, then the borrowing costs related to that will be or should be non-deductible. So if the tax office did a tax audit and picked it up, they could say, sorry, you have failed to comply with per 25 of 2017, therefore you cannot claim a deduction for the borrowing costs for that foreign private debt, even if that was a related party and the interest rate was market rate. It's bad luck. So it's important to be aware of these things. You know, you might, it's just an accident and it could create disaster for you. Of course, if the company is part of a group, you have the potential obligation to notify about country by country reporting. In most cases, it's just a case of saying, I'm not subject to it because our group is not big enough, or I'm subject to it, but the group do the reporting overseas, but not always. So you need to be aware of that. Of course, if there are any foreign tax credits, then you need to attach detail for those. And then we come to, I guess, two more lists again. If you have donations that you think are deductible, there's not many, but if you do, you need to attach a lampiran. If you're claiming a bad debt expense, you also have to attach details of those. And again, if you don't attach the details, the risk is you do not get these deductions. So moving then on, we're only talking about a couple of these slides briefly, because I'm sure everyone is aware of PPH 21 and 2326. But what I wanted to highlight regarding compliance for 21 and 236, or particularly 26, is first of all, if you are not aware, mulai 1 January 2022, this year, if a company, any company or yayasan, makes available a benefit in kind for its employees, in most cases, that benefit in kind is now object 21. I said most cases, not all cases, but most cases. There is now some limited criteria for what is not an object 21. Things like uniforms, if you can show everyone's got the uniform. If you have meals where everyone, those meals are available for everyone. So it cannot be executive dining room. Yeah, it's like open canteen, then those meals can be deductible. Remote area can be deductible. And then the law also talks about other specified benefits, but those are not yet specified. So we don't know what is going to be or what will be still a non-assessable benefit in kind. So of course, what that means is that if you are paying for housing, providing housing for staff, say in Jakarta, you are paying for life insurance, you are paying additional medical insurance, or even just, you know, the BPJS KS, all those things now are object 21. Dulu, you had the choice, you know, you could either call them assessable, deductible, or say they are non-object 21, and therefore they are non-deductible. Now there is no choice. They are assessable. Generally, every benefit in kind is assessable. And that's why I want to mention this, because some people may not be aware of this. And of course, it doesn't get triggered by when you prepare your monthly Article 21, because that depends what you put in there. It doesn't get triggered when you prepare your SPT Badan. It's only later if the AR looks at your financial statement and picks up potential benefit in kind and asks the question, why don't these reconcile to object 21 per your 17/21 return, or if there's a tax audit. So this is a good one to look for now, so that you don't then have a surprise in 1 year, 2 years time, where then you get hit with the tax and the penalty. And the other one to highlight, of course, when we talk about PPH 26, is you need to make sure that you've got the documentation. If the foreign taxpayer is in a tax treaty country, then you need to coordinate with them to make use of that tax treaty, especially if the consequence will hit you. If there's a gross up against you, then if you can get that tax treaty data, then you can reduce the gross up that you would have to pay. And so it's important, again, to follow that administration. I just wanted to, we added this slide in here about PPH 25, just to remind everyone that although you can tick a box to say, let the system calculate the PPH 25 for the next year when you prepare your SPT Badan, you can also select manual, which is relevant if you have non-recurring incomes that you want to exclude. But you do need to remember that, for example, if you're planning from 1 year to the next, if you're planning, then remember, if you've got losses can only be used one time, yeah? Once they're gone, they will not impact, and they are excluded when you're trying to calculate your Article 25. So if you're planning, what you're going to do in 2023, just remember, if there are losses now which will be utilized fully in 2022, when you hit 2023, the Article 25 will jump up, because those losses that reduced the amount of dua sembilan for 2022 disappear when you are looking at calculating for 2023. And the other one to be aware of course, is if you're currently subject to final tax under PP 23, that once that goes, you can potentially be subject to Article 25 as well. Now, just wanted to touch very briefly on a couple of VAT items, and this is just because of the new PER 3. And it's just a reminder that the system is becoming more and more integrated. And so it is important to understand how the system works and what you need to do if there's amendments or there is cancellations, for example, of services. So, you cannot, it's not like the past where everything was manual. So the system captures data, and it's important to make sure that you are maintaining that data and updating it if there's changes, because this is an area where in the past we've seen issues. The company has issued a credit note to the customer, but someone's forgotten about the VAT. Or there's been an adjustment to an invoice and they've forgotten to adjust the VAT. All these things will throw up reconciling flags to the tax office. So you've got to remember, and we'll talk about this later when we get onto tax risk management, which is making sure that everyone knows about tax issues and everyone works together to manage those tax issues. Cannot just be left to one person to watch everything. I'll leave you to read these later when you get the slide pack. I don't think there's anything critical that we need to highlight here. So I'm just going to stop briefly and ask Annie, who's my co-speaker, if there's anything she wants to add in terms of these VAT slides. Is Annie on as well?
Yeah, yes, I'm on. With regard to the VAT that you have been explaining, I think that what we need to understand and what we need to careful is related to the timeline that the company should sending or uploading for the VAT invoice to the DGT form, e-factor, I mean, because there should be by 15 that next month, the company should upload it to the e-factor. After that, will be consider the VAT invoice will be lit. Then of course, the company will be getting the penalty, and this is I think there is an equation as well. Yeah, if this is lit by the company who issuing for the VAT invoice, how's the company, or I mean that the buyer or user of that VAT invoice to treat it, whether this is considered as late as well or not. So I think it's this is critical point, and then should be managed well by the company. As we know that the company already have like SOP procedure, yeah, standard operating procedure for the issuing of the VAT invoice. This is impacted to the like when the company should issue for the invoicing, and then going to the finance for issuing for the VAT invoice. I think the company should consider about the timing because of not only one or two company that our client that they already have a like standard that they when they have to issuing the VAT invoice, and because of this regulation, some of them is quite critical because of not only for the finance part that impacted, but this is also impacted to the other division, because other division of course should provide for the data as basis for the VAT invoice. So the company should really I think, yeah, calculate it with timeline on the issuing of the VAT invoice, because this is the VAT invoice is quite like a simple, but this is quite impacted, has an impact to the company and also to the receiver of the VAT invoice. I think that's all, Pa.
Sure. Thanks, Annie.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, and we'll also again chat about this when we get to tax risk management. Again, this point about being needs to be integrated. You can't just leave it all to your one tax officer.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
He can only do certain things. He doesn't know everything. He doesn't receive everything. He can't maybe prepare the invoice. He may not even receive the invoice.
Mm.
So
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, but what we have to understand is about the VAT invoice is sometimes the company has a expectation that they would like to issue for the VAT invoice only 5 or maybe only 10, but actually in the other department has a lot of transaction, so and had a lot of I mean the thing that should be issued for the invoice. And if in one department it's been operational, didn't good coordination with the finance, maybe they will be any issue. Yeah, I know that this will be how to manage for the risk, yeah, but need to be highlighted in here as well that this is too why it should be coordinated in between of the operation and also finance, because once the finance didn't know about the how many VAT invoices will be issued in that month, and then suddenly maybe an example by 13, so the company will be have close time. I mean that the limited time to asking for the number of pet invoice to the DGT, and then so will be trigger as for the penalty, I think. So that's why for the coordination and between operational and the finance, and as you said that not just rely on the one person for the minutes on the tax, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, Pak.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And by the way, apologies that we've got NFSP. It should be NSFP, Normal Seri Fakta Pajak. But of course, again, those people who have been dealing with tax, you know, maybe 5 years ago would remember you used to have to, you know, send a note to the tax office to request extra normal seri. And even before that, you know, you had to get books of it, you know, so we have improved, but there is still this system of having to, you know, request. And so you can, you know, you can run out if you're not careful, which shouldn't create a problem, but it can. Okay, so now I'm talking about the sanctions and then some common pitfalls and how to avoid them. And I guess this is one of the positive things that has come out of HPP, which is generally the interest or the penalties have reduced. You know, dulu generally, if you're late, 2% per month, and if it was assessed by the tax office, it went sampai dengan 24 bulan. But in fact, under the old KUP, before it was amended, if you as a taxpayer suddenly realized after 3 years you had made a mistake and you had missed something, the penalty was actually, if you like, unlimited. It was up to the number of months that you were late, times 2%. So of course that effectively meant, what was the point of you being honest? If you declare it and it was 3 years late, that's 72%. Compared to you wait for tax office, if they find you, hanya 48%. Now, first of all, the limit is 24 months. And secondly, the penalties generally are less than before, because of course it's based on this Minister of Finance reference rate plus a surcharge depending on the nature of the error, you know, between 0, 5, 10 or 15% is the surcharge. And most of the time currently that is less than 2% per month. It could change, of course, as we know, the world interest rates are going up, and it could be some point in the future we could find that it's more than 2% per month. It could get there. But at the moment, for most of the penalty, interest penalty, it's masih kurang dari 2% per bulan. So that's the good news. And I won't read through all of these because you can read them and you're probably well aware of them. In most cases, people are here if they pick up the error, yeah? So that's where you've got your reference rate plus 5%, where you notice you paid something late. Or sorry, you missed something and then you need to pay it later, pay it late. Self-correction. Of course, if it's picked up by the tax auditors, then we can potentially end up with the plus 10 or the 15. In terms of the penalties, again, there has been some positive adjustments here, in that some penalties have been reduced or eliminated and some have been reduced. Now, for example, if your fakta pajak is telat or your fakta pajak is not issued sama sekali, then the penalty dulu was 2%. Now it's become 1%. So we do have, you know, some pluses, some, what do we call them, wins for the taxpayer. And there's even now more certainty regarding what would happen if you had a tax crime investigation. How is there a way to solve that? And there is, but it's a massive fine. And this, of course, comes back to what I was saying earlier. if you have good tax compliance, then what you're trying to do is to avoid ending up with these sort of big potential tax penalties, you know, that are sitting over you. If you have good tax compliance, hopefully these sorts of things do not occur. Hopefully you're not late, or if you're late, you're only late by, you know, 1 month, and so you're only up for interest penalty for 1 month. You're not late by 10 months, you know. Hopefully your VAT is prepared on time. If you should have daftar, you have daftar on time, etc. And all these sorts of penalties can be, you know, minimized, or hopefully there are no penalties. So then what are some of the, I mean, the pitfalls, and I apologize if this slide is maybe the tulisan terlalu kecil. I mean, there's many potential pitfalls, and these are just some that we have seen. The first is where the tax return is not signed by someone who either it's signed by someone who doesn't have the right to sign it, for example. And of course, if that happens, then it's deemed to be incomplete, which means not lodged. Less so these days. We do see situations where the taxpayer is using a foreign currency, normally it's US dollar, and they haven't got permission to use US dollar. In that case, the return is, you know, they're deemed to have not maintained proper bookkeeping, and that leaves them open to additional exposure. So if you or your, you know, your head office wants the company to use US dollar, then it needs to get approval. And it's important to be aware that you have to get approval within a certain deadline. If the company baru berdiri, you've got 3 months to get approval to use US dollar and English. Or if you want to change, because dulu it was rupiah, you have to do that no later than 3 months before the next year. If you're late, you miss your chance for that year. There is no ability to use currently any other currency except rupiah as the basis, or with permission US dollar. You cannot use yen, you cannot use euro, you know, you cannot use pound, you cannot use renminbi. Yeah. The only option is US dollar with permission or rupiah. And the only option currently seems to be English or Bahasa Indonesia. So it's something to be aware of. And you have to make sure you keep the evidence of that approval as well. Now, where this can get a bit complicated now is that accounting standards, PSAK, your auditor may have a different perspective to the tax office. And it is possible you could have a situation where the tax office maybe has rejected an application to use US dollar, or maybe you did not lodge it, but your auditor says, well, your business is, I don't know, gold trading, and gold uses international reference rate, which is in dollars. Therefore, auditor might say, financial auditor might say, you need to keep your books and records, or your audit report, you know, your general ledger needs to be in dollars. Suddenly you've got a conflict. So when thinking about this, you should be also thinking and discussing with if you've got a financial audit, you need to discuss it with them, because you want to be in sync. You do not want to have to maintain 2 sets of books. And you need to be aware that if for tax you're using US dollar, that doesn't mean take rupiah at year end and convert. It means when you input into your ledger, you're inputting in dollar for every transaction. Similarly, if the auditor says you should be using rupiah, well, that means every transaction should have been input in rupiah, not input in dollars. except to do the translation across. So it's not a simple exercise. So if you are a company where there is this risk, and it could be because your auditor says you should be in euro, that's another problem, because you can't even be in euro for tax. So it's well worth thinking about being aware of, because you don't want to have a surprise either from a tax or from a financial audit perspective. Of course, as we mentioned, the SPT Badan must be attached with all relevant, or include all relevant information, and must have semua lampiran yang mesti dilampirkan. If it doesn't, then it's not considered to be complete. You should, even if you are late, get your return lodged as soon as possible. You do not want to be in a situation where there is an audit before you have lapor, because then the penalties increase. If you are dealing with foreign, particularly foreign vendors, I guess, or lenders, make sure that you've got the DGT form, and if necessary, that ask that foreign party to get the certificate of tax resident from their foreign tax office. Ideally, you want that before you make any payment to them, because that then reduces the obligation for you to withhold. There are now more flexibility regarding this issue, but the smart thing to do is to deal with this matter before you make the payment, compared to later having to argue during a tax audit. I talked before about PP and Lua, what I call PP and Lua and Agree, offshore VAT. You know, we do find many clients are not aware of this obligation, and it's easy pickings for the tax auditors, easy penalties for them. And there's nothing you can argue about it. It's because it's very clear. One that can be frustrating, of course, is withholding tax on expenses or on object where you have accrued it at year end. Maybe it's not due and payable, so technically there should be no withholding tax, but we still find the tax office perspective is, if you want a deduction, we want the withholding tax. So that is something, of course, to be aware of. I talked before about the TP docs. You know, if you do have a related party transaction that meet the threshold for having TP, formal TP documentation, then you need to make sure you get those documents. Technically, they should exist at the time you lodge your tax return. Not so often, but it does happen. Companies start, belum daftar, belum menjadi MPPKP. Yeah, it does happen. And then when they hit the threshold, masih belum. And then suddenly they end up with a problem, because maybe the tax office, you know, although now if you want to register for VAT, typically it's now online. So it's an e-visit, e-verification from DGT, but that can still take time. But they might go back to offline, maybe. And if they go back to offline, then they will be slower to coordinate that visit. And of course, while you are not yet registered, you have exposure if you are continuing to bill. And if you're not billing, well, then you may have a cash flow problem. So it works both ways. So if you are a new company and you are not yet registered, you should manage that so that you start the registration process, you know, early enough supaya nanti tidak ada masalah, belum daftar tapi mesti charge VAT. And finally, another one is, of course, if you are subject to PP 23 for final tax, and this is particularly if you're a service provider providing services overseas, or you are in fact a vendor, not a service provider, a goods trader, then those things you will need to be self-assessing the PPH 23, the final tax, each month you have transaction because there is no withholder in those situations. And again, we have seen clients aren't aware that there's a self-withholding, and it's not just at year end. So these are some of the common pitfalls we see. There are, there's many other things that can go wrong, of course. As Annie has mentioned, if you aren't careful, you can run out of your nomaseri, and that can create a delay. And if you're not organized enough, suddenly you can end up with late VAT just because of poor administration. Annie, is there any other pitfall you'd like to mention here?
Okay, yes, Pak. I think what need to remain are that the company should make sure about the thing about the revenue, which is accrual, ya Pak ya. Accrual revenue, as you mentioned in here about the withholding tax, exposure of withholding tax and at year end, but need to remember about the revenue that already recorded by the company, which is has been accrued. This is sometime the tax office will issue the company as this is a pet object because already recognized to the financial statement. So that's why this will be considered as late for the issuing of the invoice if the company hasn't issued or preparing for the PAT invoice on that accrued revenue. So the company should make sure about the supporting data and to meet to the criteria, because of as we know, for the PAT should issued which one occur first, payment or recognition, or this is about the deliver, whether or not in that end of year the revenue has been met of that criteria. And of course, if already meet to the criteria to issuing for the VAT invoice, so the company should issue for the VAT invoice, even though let's say that about the payment hasn't occurred yet, but the deliver has been done. So the goods has been received by the buyer. So it should be considered by the company about the recognized of the revenue. That's all, Pak.
Okay, thanks. No, it's a very good point. Again, this comes back to the fact that your AR or many AR are now active, and because of technology, these sorts of things can be flagged for them, so they don't have to go and look at a physical tax return anymore. They can just go on and make inquiries in the database to pick up variance, and they will start with the assumption that it's a problem, and then you have to explain it. So instead of being surprised when these things come up, this is part of our tax risk management, you should be ready in advance, because that way, it's not a rush to respond to something like that. It shouldn't be a surprise. If there is a variance, you should expect to be asked if it's material. Which brings us on to the tax risk management. So this is where we're talking about how can what's the approach to take to try to reduce some of these issues. And so this is not about tax planning. This is about, managing those compliance issues, making sure, if you like, in the Australian vernacular, you don't stuff up, because that's where the problem is. We're not talking about you think something's deductible and it's not. We're just talking about you get your compliance wrong, you miss things, you late lodge, you miscalculate, you don't attach things. So, when we're looking at this, one way to do this is to think about the components. So there's a planning perspective, there's an organizing perspective, there's an implementation and a control. And through all of this, you need to be thinking who must know what to help with the compliance. Annie was talking before about, preparing the VAT invoice. Well, someone, of course, can prepare it, upload, use e-factor, but they can only do that if someone gives them the invoice. And if they don't get the invoice, well, you're going to have a problem. Someone inputs the invoice into the ledger, and this person who should be doing the faktur pajak doesn't have access to the ledger, doesn't get a copy of the invoice, you're going to have disaster. Or maybe to prepare the invoice, it needs information from operations and this and that, and biasanya lama. So you've got to look at all these things. It's not just finance or tax that has to deal with this. There's many components, and a lot of those components are people, not just systems. But both the people and systems you need to think about it and ask your management, to think about this so that information can come as quickly as possible to the right people from the right people. And so again, what that means in terms of implementation, for example, anything is only as good, any policy, any SOP is only as good as the action or the implementation. And so if you don't make sure the right people know about something so they can give you the information, then you have a problem. As an example, if employees are allowed to rent cars or pay for vendors through expense reports, that might be okay from an operational efficiency perspective, but do remember that Article 23 applies on payments for rentals, for payments for services, irrespective of materiality. I'm still waiting, after 28 years, waiting for a regulation to be issued to create some materiality, make things easier. I hope it does appear, but at the moment it's not. And so you as an organization need to decide, and I would recommend a decision is made, do you communicate to all, users of things like car rental through expense report, what are they going to have to do? Now, realistically, if they're out at, Pontianak or something, or in some small town, they're not going to, the vendor is not going to accept withholding. So they're going to have to bring the data in, and you're going to have to gross up. But my point is that users of things or payers of things need to be aware if there's something that needs to be done. If you are expecting to or planning to claim entertainment costs, you are planning to claim promotion costs, there's certain information that's necessary supaya bisa bikin lampiran nominative entertainment, nominative promotion. And you want to capture that data in your system, from day null. So you don't at year end need to suddenly panic and ask people, hey, gimana, can you give me your expense report? Can you? You don't want to have to do that. You want to build this request for information into your financial system, into your records, supaya at year end, you can get the information you need without unnecessary additional activity. That's why I say it's important to identify who must know what to ensure compliance. And it's not only the finance people, it's the ops people who are incurring expenditure. it's also, and maybe not so much from a compliance perspective, but it's also maybe your salespeople. They need to have some understanding of tax, how tax impacts on maybe the costs. Because if they're quoting to include subcontractor, they need to understand, does the subcontractor cost include their withholding tax or not? Include VAT, is that VAT creditable? So that they can build up a total cost to company. So again, tax is not just for finance. Tax is for everyone to have some awareness how it fits together. And so then you have that, and then you build the systems, or you hopefully can build systems that capture that data during the year. And then, of course, when we get to year end, then we come to the situation, or post year end, we need to do our reconciliations. Yeah, you don't lodge an SPT Badan at year end where the VAT, output VAT and revenue do not reconcile, and you do not know why. Now that's just silly, and particularly if it's material. Okay, if it's only small variance, maybe don't care. But if it's a big variance, you've got to know why. Is it because there's prepayments? Is it because of, an amortization of something, unearned income? Is it because tax credit discounts have been missed? Is it because cancelled fakta pajak have been missed, not put through the ledger, blah, blah, blah. You've got to understand it so that there's not a surprise later. Your object 21 should reconcile from your general ledger to your 1721. Same for the PPN Lu and Agree, same for object 2326. You need to look at all these things. Do they reconcile? Because if you don't do it, even if you do it or don't do it, the tax office probably will. And the point is then they ask the question, and then you are suddenly at a bad time, you are rushing to do this. And that's our point, is if you reconcile when you are ready, it's your planning, your control. If you are having to react to the tax office, it's they're in control. So that's why good tax risk management means you are organized in doing this. You spend the time, you allocate the time to do it. And just, of course, as a general comment, components of this system are the individuals, and in fact, it's not just the tax personnel. The system, of course, ideally, more things can be captured through the software, and you're using software for your accounting, you're using software for your tax calculations, etc. And then you have those SOP that are across the organization, so people know what they need to do. It's not just a black box where only the tax person knows about it. So with that, I'm now going to hand over to Eni, who's going to talk about briefly about sort of the digital channels, and also about what happens when the tax office asks some questions. So with that, I'll stop my share and I'll pass to you, Eni.
Okay, thanks, Pak. It's very clear for the thing that you already explained with regard to the management of the compliance. Then here, I would like to give the brief with regard to the digital channel, which is has been provided by the tax office by the DGT. This is actually has no choice by the company. because of DGT has been provided for the platform or channel that should be used by the taxpayer. This is, as we know, now we have e-factur and we have e-filing, that everything is came from DGT, which is a user for all of the taxpayer, whether this is individual or corporate or GO, this is whoever. As we know that the tax collection here is self-assessed, and the taxpayer should be calculated, and then payment, and then reporting, that everything, all of the activity with regard to the calculate, report, and then also payment has been combined in the platform that provided by DGT. This is like withholding tax. Currently, withholding tax that withheld or already withheld by the third party, the company or the other party now already only receive for the tax receipt, that this is directly able to deduct it or able to credit it by that party. Also with regard to the VAT, when the company, the party already issued the VAT invoice, the buyer or the user of the services can be directly credited on that VAT invoice. So on that mechanism, so we know that DGT has a platform which is what we can call is monitoring us and make us to easier for reporting, for payment, and also for the filing. Because of previously, the company or the taxpayer should manually reporting for the tax report, but now from whenever the company or taxpayer able to report for the monthly or annual tax report. And also with regard to the tax payment, previously we bring the hard copy, or we calling SSP, to the bank, and currently the tax office easier, the taxpayer just easier making an ID billing from that platform than pay to the bank, which is the company, not necessarily going to the bank, but can do by electronic banking. So everything is make easy. And previously we just have a time maybe until 3 o'clock to going to the tax office for reporting. Now the taxpayer has 24 hours for reporting on that tax report. And now the tax office also already issued for the e-filing, that previously e-form, but now as a e-filing. So this is more easier for the taxpayer. Okay, I think this is already stated in the e-form, yeah, Pak. So I think all of you able to open for the application, and this is we provide for the guidance how to register for the e-filing in the DGT online. Okay, and then here there is any step that you have to know about the in the DGT form, this is the e-filing, which is for individual taxpayer. It should be that person should be going to there to get an avian, and for corporate taxpayer, it should be the management appointed that should going to the tax office. And after obtain the VAT, the avian, the taxpayer can register by creating for the account in the online tax service, and in the DGT online page, on the page in the ESPT service provider. So everything is going to be online. So this is to encourage for everyone. It means that individual and also for the corporate taxpayer to pay or to pay and reporting for the tax. This is I think it's already balanced with the how the tax office need more taxpayer paid and paid or reporting on their tax obligation, but the DGT also provide the platform which is to make it easier for the reporting and for the payment. And this is I think I will not going to detail for the explain about the DGT channel here, because of I believe that everyone here is already understand, and I think here is already familiar for the thing about the DGT platform, ya Pak ya. So because this is also a concern to the time, and as you know that currently the tax office has a like motto that they have a practice cepat and aman, and of course this is why they also issued for the payment system or billing system based on the generation 2, what we calling is MPNG 2. This is make easier, Pak, make easier about the how to make a payment, how to make a reporting to the tax. And that's all for the DGT platform. And then because the constraint to the time, I will inform you about the how to responding for the tax office inquiries. This is I think a lot of taxpayer got the SP2DK, and in the beginning, in the earlier Panik also inform or explain about the tax audit, which is currently is not only for the company who asking for refund, but every company has a chance to get the tax audit by the DGT, even though that company or the taxpayer already pay for the youth tax payment. But this is not because of that the DGT didn't come to the taxpayer. How to manage if the company or the taxpayer got the SP2DK? This is of course coming from the verification done by the AR. AR will be review for the tax that already reported by the taxpayer, and also they will review from the data that incoming to the DGT platform. So that's why the company should concern about this SP2DK, because so the company should or taxpayer should respond within 14 days. Why? Because of by ignoring to the letter issued by the tax office, this will be a trigger for the tax office to wondering to that taxpayer why I already sending the letter, but the company or the taxpayer didn't responding. So will be better, and this is must, the taxpayer sending a response. And if the taxpayer has any answer on that letter, that on that question that sending by tax office in the SP2DK, so the company or the taxpayer able to asking for the extent. So better to coordinate with the AR, and asking for extent to submit for the SP2DK response. And of course, this is will be depend to the AR whether or not the extend time for responding as SP2DK is provided. Then except to the response, the company or taxpayer should also provide the necessary document which is requested by tax office. And also would be good if the taxpayer consult the tax consultant, because of if you provide unnecessary documents, this is not related to the what the tax office asking for, this is will be make or will be triggered to have or to create another question. And this is another important that should be concerned by taxpayer, that taxpayer should understand what tax obligation and then what tax risk about the tax about that SP2DK. And usually the AR sometimes will be passive, but here the taxpayer will be should be very proactive to them. Let's say that about the timely for the responding, and then what the thing related to the document that provided, sure should be proactive to the AR, because as you know that SP2DK will not any like SKP or the certain letter to closing that SP2DK. SP2DK only closed by the settlement of tax and additional tax liability, or maybe proposing by AR going to the tax audit. This is will be occur if if there is no agreement. I mean agreement in here in the positive way, agreement in between of the taxpayer and the DGP. What kind of the tax obligation should be paid by the taxpayer? And then the other one is related to the tax audit. If the taxpayer is subject to tax audit, the taxpayer should give a response within 7 days, give the document required by the tax auditor, and prepare also what the documents should provide to the tax auditor. And also please give the receipt, what kind of document that you provide to the GT or tax auditor, because this is very important. When the taxpayer has a dispute with the result of tax auditor, so this is the part of the document that should be going to the appeal, to the objection and appeal. And also please ensure that all of data is provided during the tax audit, because it's do not provide for the data during a tax audit will not be considered if the taxpayer going for objection and appeal. And also, you have, or taxpayer should responding for SPHP or tax finding letter, and also should attend the closing meeting, because not attending for the closing meeting will be deemed as agreed for all of the finding by the tax auditor. So this is the point that you have to know and you have to aware of, because of we don't know what the kind of tax assessment letter or SKP that issued by the tax auditor in the future, whether or not this is will become a dispute. So during a tax audit should be managed, should be make sure all of the document is provided, documented, and even though this is about the explanation or information by verbal, so will be better if taxpayer also documented and give like explanation letter, explanation by written, and then this is to support for the taxpayer there is any proof that during a tax audit provide information supporting data. Of course, this is all of should be relevant. I think that's all for me. So hopefully this is sufficient. So going to the question and time I give to Hani. Thanks, Hani.
Okay, Pak Nick and Bu Eni, thank you for the presentation. It is really a very insightful presentation. It's really opened our mind that this tax compliance is really need to be handled carefully. So remembering the time, now we are moving on to Q&A session. The first questions is from Bu Mayang. If the company has submitted the extension request of annual corporate income tax return to the tax office, will the tax office automatically agree the extension request? Or if it is rejected, is this what are the factors that made the request is being rejected? Maybe for Pak Nick or Bu Eni.
Okay, Pak. Thanks, Hani. Yeah, this is in the regulation. The tax office mentioned that they have 7 days to respond what the request or inform to extend for the submission for the corporate tax return. If during 7 days the DGP or the tax office didn't provide or respond, so mean that the extension is approved by DGP. So this is not like previously, but this is only 7 days. They have a time to give a response to the company. And then in practically now, so far DGP will not issue any letter and then just waiting for the 2 months after the extension letter is submitted by the taxpayer. So after that, their alert will be on. Yeah, I hope Bu Mayang, you.
Thank you, Bu Eni. I hope Bu Mayang now is clear with the answer. And moving on to the second question from Bu Ira Wulandani. If in current year, the taxpayer has decreased its revenue and want to submit the installment Article 25 reduction, what are the terms and conditions that should be prepared by the taxpayer, and what are the documentation that must be attached when you are submitting the request to the tax office? Is there any particular regulation regarding this, and the example of the template of the request letter? Weni, maybe you can answer, or Pak Nick?
Related to the reduction, reduction for the Article 25. Yes, the company or the taxpayer able to asking for the reduction, and this the basis of the regulation is KUP 537 tahun 2000. About the format, there is no specific format. And then of course, it should be any condition that why the taxpayer asking for the reduction for the installment Article 25. Should be attached by the calculation about the how much the Article 25 it should be payable during the time, and then it should be provide like projected revenue, and then why this is will be reduced, it should be reduced, and then why the company not should pay the Article 25 on that month. And also it should be provide the reasonable reason, except to the reason. It means that supporting data. In example, that there is any reduction of the revenue, or maybe discontinue of the contract, or maybe in the force majeure, something like this. So the company able or taxpayer able to asking for the reduction. Although we don't know the tax office will be proof or not, but you able to asking for the reduction.
Yeah, if I can just maybe add a little bit to that. Of course, you basically have to have at least 3 months of history to show that there is going to be a reduction, which has to be, I think it has to be at least 25% down, so 75% is compared to last year. We often find, frankly, that the tax office, if you apply in April or May for a January-December year, it's going to be very difficult for the tax office, or very unlikely for DJT to accept that application. They will say too soon, still kalau ini baru bulan Mei, wah masih 7 bulan, let's wait, and then you apply in July and they say, wah, masih belum, and then you apply in October and they say, oh, why don't you just wait and claim refund? So it can be very difficult, but all you can do is put as much information as possible. As Annie mentioned, if you're a business that relies on certain contract, you've probably got much more ability to be successful, because if you had that big contract that's finished and you don't have any more projects, you've got much more chance of being successful compared to if you've got a general business, because it'll be harder to convince DJT that you are, your business is fully going to decline. Maybe they expect it's going to come up. So it can be quite difficult. And unfortunately, as Annie said, it's a permohonan, it's a request. You have the right to request, but that's it. You don't have the right to get an approval. That's up to the tax office, and so it is difficult. And I guess, yes, the sooner you apply, the better. You can apply as many times as you like, but there is no, there is no ability to appeal the decision, unfortunately.
Yeah, Bu Ira, if for the reason of reduction, if this is because of berakhirnya kontrak kerja, ending of the agreement, yes, it should be attached. This is a supporting data. It's not just written because of this, but it should be supported by something. Will be better if this is also from the third party, and this is a contract. Contract is in between of the taxpayer and the third party. It is should be as a strong point, but come back again to what the tax office will be review on your request.
Yeah, just remember that you've got to give them the reason to approve, because their starting position is they will reject. So you have to kasih bukti. If you don't give them evidence, then they will reject. That's guaranteed. You just kalau give them a story, they will reject. Harus ada bukti.
Yeah, even though there is any projection of financial statement, but this is just a number what the tax office thinking, but so that's why the third party document like agreement, and then the calculation for the, in example, the discontinue of that agreement, or with the third party or with the other party, is coming with this amount of our revenue, and then because of this discontinue, so there is nothing, or maybe it's a reduction in a certain percent, and of course should be attached by something to convince that the tax office will provide you for the reduction on the Article 25.
Okay, thank you, Pak Nick, Bu Eni, because the time has already finished. It's already 4 o'clock. For the participant who wants to get the material presentation, we have shared the link feedback form to fill in. After you are filling in the feedback form, you will get the presentation material. And don't worry if you, for the participant who wish to join another RSM webinar, please do check our website regularly and register the events. Thank you for all the speakers, all the participants. See you in the next event.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.